Hey guys, Erin here with Southern Girl Exotics. Welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to do a video that is going to touch on another question that is very popular and asked very frequently, especially among newer keepers. Why is my animal not thriving in my care? Well, typically they are. I think that when we all can relate to this, I think that when we get a species that we are not familiar with, we can be somewhat overwhelmed because we want to make sure it survives. We want to make sure it's thriving in our care. We want to make sure we're doing everything right. And we just don't understand this animal yet. What's its normal behaviors? What's its normal routine? Is it acting appropriately? So I'm going to go over some tips and tricks that if you follow some of these tips, I promise you, most times than not, unless you have an already sick animal, an actual animal that's sick, these tips will guarantee that your animal is going to have a smooth transition into your care, as well as you are going to have a smooth transition into caring for it. So I hope you guys enjoy the video. You know the deal. Thumbs it up if you like it. Definitely subscribe, and I will see you guys at the end of the video. Thanks so much for watching. Tip number one, before you even walk away from a breeder's table or before you send that last payment to pay for your animal and get it shipped, you need to make sure you have covered your bases and you have asked appropriate questions. Good questions are, how is the animal's feeding response? Is it underweight? Does it feed well? Should it be bigger for its size? Is it a finicky eater? I don't care if you're talking snakes or geckos. It's a very important question. If it's a good eater, great. If it's not, it's good to know that it's not going to be so that you can prep for that and understand that may be a part of the animal's natural behavior. You also need to know what they are feeding. Again, I don't care if you're doing snakes or if you're doing geckos. If you keep with what the breeder is feeding them, at least during that transition period, the first month or two, you're going to have a smoother transition for these animals. Different breeders may use different brands of crested gecko diet. Certain animals may favor certain flavors, so breeders might stick with that. Not every breeder is going to set you up with a starter pack of food, so you need to make sure that you have done your research with the breeder and you know what the animal is currently eating. I promise you this is going to make a world of difference when you go to set your new animal up. It's one less thing that's going to be new and unfamiliar with them. Next, you need to make sure that you have your husbandry almost about as exact as the breeder. Now, some breeders don't treat their animals very well. However, if it's been in a smaller enclosure, you might be better off keeping it in a smaller enclosure for a little while and then transitioning it to bigger enclosures. If it's been in a big enclosure, maybe you want to keep it in a big enclosure. So really you need to know that you understand how it's been kept, what's most familiar. So if you are running into issues, you can always backpedal and make sure that you have the available information so you can set these animals up how they were prior and then slowly transition them into whatever your goal is to have them, whether that's a big enclosure, whether that's a bioactive, whether that's feeding on a certain food, whether that's handling, whatever your goal is. You need to transition into that stuff. And the only way for you to appropriately make sure that these animals are having the best, smoothest process in your care in the beginning is to make sure you're asking the right questions before you even get these animals into your care. Everybody should be doing this anyways. I never hear it being pushed anymore. I never see people talking about it anymore. Quarantining your animals when you first get them. This is going to be a lifesaver when you are learning your animal. There's a ton of reasons we need to quarantine, but the most important is you do not want to expose your other animals to a sick animal. Animals can come with crypto, which is highly contagious, super deadly. It's going to wipe out your collection if you expose your animals to crypto. Mites, not something you typically see with a lot of captive bred geckos. However, snakes, any wild caught animals absolutely can bring mites in. Another thing that can just spread super fast among your collection if you're not careful. And then of course, this helps you have a good learning process of getting to know your animal, what you're supposed to look for. Poop is such a big factor when you're keeping an animal for the first time. You can learn so much from their poop. Is it runny? Does it have urates in it? Does it have some type of fibrous substrate in it that you need to be concerned about? Is your animal pooping? If you have a basic little setup for the first couple of weeks for your animal, all of these questions will be easily answered. You can carefully look at your animal on a daily basis in one of these. If you have your animal and just throw it into an elaborate setup as soon as you get home, you're going to run the risk of, one, it spreading disease if it has disease. Two, you're going to not be able to monitor its pooping, monitor its eating, monitor its behavioral habits that well. So this is going to be a lifesaver when you first bring home an animal. These are very basic setups. This is a 15-quart bin. I bought the vents. These vents come from Joe Loma over at Hellfire Exotics. I love his vents. They're screw on, and they have those little lips on the side to make sure that they stay intact. The old school ones just kind of screw on, but they're perfectly circular, so they can easily pop in and out of the hole that you drill. Even if you don't want to invest in vents and make a bin like this, you can very easily just buy a 15-quart, drill holes in the top, or even in the older days, I used to just cut a hole out and use screen and super glue it on. So there's definitely some money saving ways you can make quarantine bins, but you want it to be pretty basic. You want it to have, I said this in a previous video, I like to use white paper towels. White paper towels with no decor on it, so I can easily, especially if I have a smaller animal whose poops are microscopic just about, I can easily see what it's pooping. Is there anything alarming in its poop? Any blood, fibrous things? Does it have the urates in there? Because that's very hard to see with tiny animals. So I love the white paper towels. You can do either, just use a paper towel. It's much easier to keep an eye on your animal. Arboreal geckos absolutely are going to have some type of perch. I like to use pool noodles because I can expose them. So every time I get a new animal, it goes into a quarantine bin. I can bleach this out, wipe it out real good, and then I can dispose of these after each animal that uses it. Same with the fake foliage. They need to still feel secure. They still need to have some type of hiding element in their whatever bin, enclosure, whatever you're going to use for your quarantine tank. So again, I like to use the fake plants. I can dispose of these if I need to, especially if I have an animal or a questionable animal. I like things I can throw away and I'm not losing a ton of money. But quarantining your animals for the first 2 to 3 weeks at the absolute minimum is a great practice. Your animals as well are going to respond so much better if you take the time to put them in something small where they can easily get familiar with their surroundings. It's also going to be best if you put this somewhere that it's still getting a light day and night cycle, but that it doesn't have a room that doesn't have a ton of traffic, and you're not constantly checking and aggravating your animal. But this is going to be super beneficial if you are highly concerned that your animal is not eating. Even if you've had it for a while, take it back to a quarantine bin and let it chill out for a few weeks. Typically that will lessen its stress and solve whatever problems you're having. So these smaller animals are going to do fantastic in here, especially. Even adults will be fine for a couple weeks so that you can just get comfortable and keep an eye on them. With a basic setup like this, you can see everything clearly. You can see your gecko real well. The bottom is clean, so you know if anything is going on. If they do poop, if they do regurgitate their food, you will easily see it, which you're not going to be able to see if you have it in a full-fledged bioactive enclosure, big enclosure, as soon as you get it home. All right, guys, next tip, stop handling your geckos once you get them home. I understand how hard this is, especially if you are a parent that just bought a gecko for your child. trying to make a child understand that their new pet is not a puppy dog and it does not need to be handled and touched constantly when it's brand new is near impossible. But you have a responsibility to these animals to do what's right for them. Handling your animals is a highly stressful situation for them. I don't care if your animal has been with you for 15 years or if it's been with you for one day. These are prey animals in the wild. They get highly uncomfortable, even though they can be super tolerant and super calm and chill when you're handling them. Majority of them don't want to be handled, especially when they just got moved into a new environment, especially if they have been in transit for 24 hours being shipped, or if you have picked them up from a show that they have spent the last 72 hours in a cup on display for the world to see. These are already highly stressful elements for them. So your best bet when you get these animals home is to put them in their quarantine bins, leave them be. I understand handling is also a big thing that people are highly concerned about when they get their new gecko, or at least they use that as an excuse for needing to handle them. You're going to have these animals for the next 10 to 20 years if you take good care of them. You have plenty of time to work on handling. The smaller they are, the more finicky they're going to be regardless. And the older they are, the more easily it's going to be to transition them into a tolerant, handleable animal. So you have plenty of time to work on it. It is not something that needs to be worked on in the first 30 days or even 2-3 months. You have plenty of time to get to the handling part. Okay guys, next tip, stop hand feeding these animals when you get them home and you find yourself concerned if they're eating or not. I don't know how this fad started. I don't know if a bunch of people saw some pet tubers or saw some vet information 1 or 2 times being spread, but this is not a good practice. There are several things that you are going to be doing wrong when you are forcing them to eat or hand feeding them. One, you're going to undo all the work that a breeder has put in to make sure these animals are well established for you. They are eating out of bowls. They are eating well. Because what happens is they absolutely can become dependent on you feeding them. And while that may be exciting when you first get these animals, I promise you, once you get used to having them, you've had them for a couple years, you do not want the chore of having to hand feed them for 20-30 minutes every other day, especially if you have a life and you've got shit you got to do. So while it's cute and it's fun when you first get them and exciting, you are going to build a dependency for them, and you're going to undo what breeders have worked hard to make sure the animal is well established to go into your care. Unless your vet has told you to force feed your animal, shown you how to properly do it, you have no business trying to force feed an animal or hand feed an animal. Don't get me wrong, I think it's fine if you do it once in a while just for like a cute little bonding session or because you want a little picture for social media. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying there is. But if it is something where you are feeding this animal every feeding, hand feeding, because you are so concerned it's not eating or it's not thriving, that is an issue. Not to mention you are causing an element of stress for this animal. Again, like we just spoke about, these animals do not want to be handled. They certainly don't want to be handled while they are at a vulnerable state, like eating. That is a vulnerable place for them. They've got their bellies full, they've got their mouths full of food, and this large human is handling them. However, if your animal is willing to eat from a spoon or a bowl that you have shoved in front of its face, it's most likely eating when it's in its enclosure. Sometimes you can't tell, especially when they're in the adjustment period and they're just starting out at their new place, because they might not be as hungry. They might be more focused on their surroundings. They might be more focused on just hiding and getting comfortable. So you don't want to mess that up by feeling like you need to hand feed them. I always tell, which a lot of people might go against this, I tell people until your animal is established, don't feed it live feeders. Speaking about New Caledonia geckos. However, I get customers all the time, they're first time gecko moms, they're freaking out, they don't think their animal's eating, they don't think it's thriving, and I have to reassure them the animal's eating. If it's eating out of a cup that you're putting in front of its nose while you're handling it, it's eating in its enclosure. Also, you can throw 3 to 4 crickets in. Most of these animals, especially new cows, have a great feeding response to crickets. If the crickets are gone in the morning, that means the animal's eating. If it's eating crickets, it's eating. After that, you need to stop giving it crickets until you're sure that it's eating its Pangea on a regular feeding routine. But that is mainly just for your peace of mind. If you are that anxious and that concerned that your animal is not eating, you can always throw crickets in there one time just to reassure yourself that it's eating. Because if it'll eat the crickets, it's not sick to a point that it's not eating. And then there's the different element of this, which is the force feeding that some of y'all do, where you put it on the animal's nose and force them to lick it off. I don't know, again, why this is acceptable or why people push this. This is not a recommendation that you need to follow. Forcing an animal that may be full or may just not be in the mood to eat, again, is going to cause a high element of stress. You're going to make the animal uncomfortable by forcing it to swallow food. You're putting food on its face. Can you imagine if somebody was just wiping food on your face? A lot of y'all put it on their nose where it's probably covering up their nostrils, which is forcing them to lick it off. It's just a very bad practice. If you are that concerned that your animal is not eating, that you're actually forcing it to eat, you need to cough up the money and take it to the vet. Next tip, invest in a kitchen scale. This is going to be your best friend anytime you are working with juveniles or babies, anytime you get a new animal, anytime you are unsure if your animal is eating, growing, doing what it's supposed to do in an appropriate manner. Kitchen scales are going to save your life and they're going to lessen your anxiety. Kitchen scales are great because they weigh in grams. The majority of small reptiles are weighed in the gram setting. And this is going to allow you to see if your animal is gaining weight, losing weight, what. Now keep in mind, these animals absolutely can fluctuate between a gram or 2 between the week. So that is perfectly normal. Sometimes they can poop a 2 or 3 gram poop. So you're going to weigh weekly. I recommend that you weigh weekly. As long as they're not losing more than 3 grams within a week or 2, I don't think you have anything to concern yourself with. Typically, they will get that weight right back up after their next feeding. Now, a sick reptile absolutely will lose weight progressively, and they do it pretty quickly once they get sick. These guys naturally can slow down their metabolisms. They can slow down the chemicals going on in their body so that when it gets cold or they go into seasonal changes, they typically will not metabolize all their fat real fast like they will when they're sick. So if your animal, if you're weighing it weekly when you first get it, if your animal is losing more than 1 or 2 grams within 3 or 4 weeks, you need to have it seen. If your animal loses 2 or 3 grams the first week and then the next week it's back up 1 or 2 grams, that means your animal's eating, it's doing what it needs to do. But a small fluctuation is no cause for concern. However, the scale is going to be your best friend. Just don't let it become another source of anxiety for you. I see that as well with a lot of my customers. I'll recommend getting a kitchen scale, and then they start freaking out that their animal lost 0.5 gram that week. That is perfectly normal. It's not the end of the world. It will bounce right back. Again, if it's losing several grams, then you have cause of concern, especially if it's week after week. By the 3rd week, I'd absolutely take it in to be seen. That's going to bring me to my last and final tip for you guys. If you are sure these animals are not thriving in your care, if you're sure this animal's not eating, it's not pooping, it's becoming lethargic, it's being unbalanced when it's walking, crawling, trying to climb, you need to seek vet care. If it's mouth gaping, sometimes they can mouth gape for a minute if they're mad, but once you walk away, they typically will shut their mouths and go back about their business. All of these are signs that your animal may have something more serious going on. Respiratory infections, rot, tail rot, mouth rot can cause them to go off food. So there's several things that absolutely can be concerning with your animal, but if you're quarantining them and keeping a close eye on them, you're going to see all of this stuff before it gets out of control or before your animal is so far gone that even a vet visit is not going to help it. Again, that is why I can't stress enough the quarantine process for both you and the animal. But these animals absolutely deserve the same vet care and attention that your dog or cat would. Oh, there's my escaped gecko. He just ran while I was making this video. What are you doing up there, Willy Wonka? You know you're not supposed to be up there. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you put these practices in play, if you take these tips and actually use them, I promise you, you will see a difference in both your ability to care for a new species as well as your animal's ability to quickly adjust and make itself comfortable in its new surroundings. Totally up to you if you want to follow them, but I know this works. I have done it with hundreds and hundreds of animals, and I never have the same concerns or issues that a lot of my newer customers that are not putting these practices in play are having. So again, take what you will from the video. Hopefully it'll help those that will put it in practice, especially if you currently have an animal that you're struggling with, you're scared it's not eating or it's not doing well. Try these tips and tricks, and remember, when all else fails, these animals deserve vet care just like any other animal. So if you are absolutely convinced that nothing's working, you know it's dropping weight, you know it's not eating, it's nothing you're doing, your husbandry is correct, take it into a vet. These guys will suffer for a very long time before they actually pass away when they are sick. It's not fair to the animal. So make sure that if nothing else works, you are seeking vet care for these animals. They deserve it. Anyways, give the video a thumbs up. Definitely subscribe, and I will see you guys next Sunday. Thanks again for watching. Have an amazing week.